90s comic book bad girls have prerequisites. Impossible bodies, scantily clad costumes, and some kind of edginess or attitude. And better yet is if they have some artistic style to their books. Today's subject of graphic adaptations ticks all the boxes. Today, we're talking about Witchblade. In this series, Graphic Adaptations, I try and take a movie or comic and compare it to its adaptation into a movie or a comic. We're going to look at the original comic, a more recent jumping on point for the title to see where it's gone that only cost $4.99, and the most recent attempt to reboot the entire series, and then we'll look and see how the live-action TV series turned out. There's also an anime that came out in the 2000s for Witchblade. I'm not going to cover that here, but I did make a microgenre video for all the Image Comics animated series, and you can find that in the microgenre playlist. So let's start at the beginning. Marc Silvestri is one of the 7 founding Image Comics creators. He had risen to prominence from penciling Uncanny X-Men and Wolverine in the late 80s and early 90s for Marvel before he left to start Image. His imprint within Image Comics is called Top Cow, and they didn't start with Witchblade as his flagship title. At first he launched Cyberforce, which was another X-Men-esque team book that was quite honestly lost in a sea of Image team books like Wildcats, Youngblood, Wetworks, Stormwatch, Brigade. Each was more generic than the last. Not that it wasn't a good seller, it just didn't make a distinct Cyberforce-sized impact on pop culture now over 30 years later. And within the first few years of them building their financial empires and turning from day laborer artists into multi-millionaire CEOs, almost just as quickly their fortunes turned. Many Image titles were notoriously late, the market was flooded, the speculator market collapsed. Truthfully, the hype was selling a lot of these books, but now that they were out, you couldn't hide the fact that many weren't that great. Some of the Image creators run back to Marvel for a paycheck, but Silvestri wasn't one of them. Instead, he neatly began to pivot away from the overabundance of these superhero team books and into a more mystical or magical realm of titles. Witchblade started in '95 and the Darkness spin-off title in 1996. His imprint did have a certain house style to it of what kind of books they were going to deliver.
Top Cow and Mark created sort of this high-end art boutique style.
Like that slick, sexy, dangerous lifestyle, the Ferrari, the gleamy.
So, full disclosure, I was never a Witchblade fan. The comic came out at the right time for me, and I was very much aware of the book, but I was more into the gnarly demons and Spawn at the time. I actually kind of prefer Cyberforce, if only because that first run of Image titles hit when I was 12, and it was, or 13, it was all about Image in that moment. I think it didn't help that I missed both the first issue of Witchblade and the Darkness when they hit. They were both instant hits and hot books, so if you missed it, you kind of missed it. The trade paperbacks, they were only really starting and not to be expected for any series. And of course, no digital scans to download. So if you missed the first issue, maybe you could try and find it at a convention, but all of the Image books' first issues were going up in price, and for a kid, you might not be able to invest 20 or 30 bucks for a hot comic when you could just get 20 or 30 old back issues for the same price. Okay, now we have the background context for the series, let's talk about the comic, and which comics I read for this video. The original Witchblade comic, I read about the first dozen issues or so. Obviously, this is an important place to start. This is where we set the tone for the book, where we lay out the mythology of the Witchblade and who the key players are. So why don't we do that now? Sarah Pazzini is a cop from New York, and she comes into contact with this ancient supernatural gauntlet device which covers her hand but also can extend to cover other parts of her body with armor, and she uses that. It gives her supernatural abilities to fight crime and outside of her role as a cop, I suppose. Beyond that, there's a bunch of melodrama, but that's the basic concept. There's a long continuity for Witchblade, different hosts and story arcs, but for our purposes here, we'll just do a brief mention of some other characters who are there in the formative years, like Kenneth Irons, who is a mysterious, creepy rich guy who knows a lot about the Witchblade. So you're always kind of wondering what his angle is. Sarah's forced to deal with him at times because she needs that information, but she walks the line feeling manipulated by him, but also trying to get what she needs from him. he's considered the first antagonist or baddie or villain for the series. He's accompanied by Ian Nottingham, who's a mysterious pretty boy assassin who works for Irons. Maybe he's more pretty in the TV series, but he's definitely cool and slick looking in the comic. Nottingham also kills Pizzini's partner, Michael Yee, who she keeps seeing after his death. Now, all of these characters are in the TV series as well, but not this guy. This is not Chow Yun-fat from The Killer or A Better Tomorrow, but it so obviously is Chow Yun-fat. I had no explanation for that one. The original run has a number of artists who are superstars in the medium today, like Tony Daniel, who did some fill-in issues in the first dozen, creating a pirate Witchblade character. David Finch, within the years, the artist on the Darkness title. Also, Finch worked on Aphrodite 9, or is it IX? I think it's Aphrodite 9, as well as the Ascension for Top Cow, which launched in 97, and helped further distinguish Top Cow from the expected superhero stuff of the 90s that was drying up. But Michael Turner was the artist on the initial run of the book in 95 and drew all but 2 of the first 25 issues. He's a key part of what made the book successful. Turner has a very clean Silvestri/Jim Lee style that so many artists were attempting to emulate. Turner was just one of the better ones to do it. I think that this is the run that Top Cow has been chasing ever since. It's so iconic to the 90s and gives a certain aesthetic on a visual level, but for me the storytelling's just a bit dry. I'd already had enough of the constant melodrama from Spawn each month, with long diatribes about good and evil and mysterious pasts and shadowy characters, to really be drawn to the original Witchblade books. Okay, but now let's talk about this $4.99 volume. The art style by Stjepan Sejic is interesting. At first, I really kind of disliked it. I'm personally not a fan of computer-painted artwork like this for comics because of the odd melding of CGI-type textures with rudimentary scribbling with a paintbrush. Like, in my heart, I'm just like an old-school comic art guy. I want to see the line art. I want to feel the weight of the inked line. That's just my personal ideal for what a comic should be. Well, I've kind of come around to the result of Stjepan's art. It's kind of mesmerizing, actually. There's a sense of depth of field at play and conveying detail effectively while not actually delivering much. And in that way, the art feels more, gestural, with textures over top. And as the book went on, I kind of grew to enjoy it more than I expected, stopping often just to look at it and think about how I thought the image was constructed. So I can't deny, I think that's kind of cool. And you can't go wrong with a $4.99 price tag. It's a great lost leader book, I'm sure, but worth $5. The story incorporates a few other of the main offshoot characters from the Witchblade universe, like Aphrodite 9 and Angelus, who's like a positive aspect of the darkness, and they split good and evil of the Witchblade as they did in a previous story. Sarah also had a child with the darkness, and I personally didn't feel overwhelmed by the preceding continuity. There was the captions at the start that effectively caught me up, and I actually like continuity in history. I get that I'm getting old, but I started reading Amazing Spider-Man with issue 350 when I'm 10 or 12, and I thought that was exciting. It was something to dig into, not shy away from. I know there are plenty of series that I will probably never get to due to the commitment, of time, right, and energy, but that's one of the distinct aspects of comics that's pretty beautifully unique, so I like this book quite a bit. The Reboot volume is the other volume that I read by Margaret Bennett, and I think it's moderately interesting, but not enough to grab me any more than the older series. I think the $4.99 edition was a better story, and giving the feeling of a jumping on point that's accessible to new readers while also a sense of the legacy that they're taking on. It felt like a living world of characters, where the Reboot feels more like a reboot you didn't think you needed anyway. I'm not really sure what it added or changed to reignite interest for readers, honestly. Okay, now let's talk about the TV series. Yancey Butler was perfect casting for the day. She looks like Michael Turner was drawing Sarah Pizzini from photos of Yancey Butler. Her lips, her eyebrows, Her face couldn't be more perfect for this role, but it's not just the superficial surface stuff. She's tough as nails, and we know that from her roles in Lake Placid sequels decades later as a tough old lady. I talk about those movies in my micro-genre video on Killer Crocodiles, so you can check that out if you want. Now, I know her from her work in Hard Target and Drop Zone. Her substance abuse issues prevented the series from going forward, or at least played some part in the cancellation. The Witchblade itself, like the actual gauntlet that goes on her hand, it's kind of lacking in the show, I think. It's so distinct in the comic, right, that it's got that bioorganic look and style. The clunky suit of armor metal glove for the TV show is a letdown, and it becomes a bit silly when it's her only bit of armor on one hand and she's being shot at by numerous people and they can only shoot her in her armored hand, I guess. It doesn't even look she's moving around that much. It's just like, ping, ping, you missed me. There are parts where she's fully armored up, and the choice to make her look like an old medieval suit of armor, while I'm sure it's fiscally responsible, it's less than inspiring. It reminds me of that scene in Bill and Ted where they're sword fighting in the suits of armor.
I'll never rule the universe with you! Oh. Hey, Bill! What? We totally know how to sword fight!
Let's just say it's clunky and less than supernatural. And also, the attempted use of a super cheap bullet time effect in the plot is a waste of resources in production when they could have focused more on other areas, in my opinion. Like, take a look at this scene that for some reason is doing its best mashup of Brad Pitt fight clubbing or boxing and Snatch. This dude has such Pitt envy. Now, if you're going to track down the show and give it a watch, I'm going to give you one heads up, a spoiler for Season 2. Basically, in the finale of Season 1, she turns back time to the first episode, and Season 2 starts everything over again. But this time, it's different. And this is lame for numerous reasons. One of the most glaring reasons is that Sarah in the first season is obsessed with her father's murder, which she solves by the end of the first season. There's a reveal, but then we go back in time and now Sarah doesn't mention her father at all. Now, obviously, we as the audience don't want to watch her solve the same mystery over again, but to forget all about it, it's just nonsensical. Fans of the show are forgiving and critics can be brutal. If you loved the comic, then this doesn't stray far from the world set up in the comics. If you don't care about the comic, then this show just looks like another low-budget gimmick cop show. I think that the show isn't truly horrible, but in 2001, it should have been better. Like, if this show had come out in 1992, it would have been more impressive, but in 2001, it's underwhelming. Even in the 80s, next to Knight Rider or A-Team or Battlestar Galactica, I can see Witchblade falling in line perfectly. It reminds me a bit of the Highlander TV series, actually. Not quite the quality you hoped for, storylines where we look back into the past, into the lineage of the hero of the show, kind of moody and action-oriented, usually ending episodes with a sword fight, having old rich white guys watching these supernatural wars between good and evil play out among us unaware citizens. Even the production values feel similarly lacking for what the show was aiming for. The problem for future shows or movies being produced is the same as it is for the Spawn movie that never seems to quite get into production. The comics just don't have the same heat or relevance that they did in the 90s. Just looking at the comic reboots and jumping on points, you can see what I mean. The good news is that unlike Spawn, the entire concept and necessary components for a Witchblade TV series or movie are far less demanding or cost prohibitive, so there's a chance we could see another reboot in the future. Witchblade isn't really my jam, if I'm being honest. I waited 25 years to see this show, and it was pretty much what I expected it would be, and the comic was similarly underwhelming to me personally, so I hope I presented it fairly to any of you fans out there. And I'll see you guys next week.